بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. My dear brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. With you, I would like to welcome Sheikh Ahmed Salim.
Assalamu alaikum wa
Assalamu
rahmatullahi wa
alaikum, Sheikh.
barakatuh.
Jazakallah khair for coming back to continue additional discussions that as important, if not more important even. So I understand the topic today is called unmasked generation. Unmasked generation. So
Yes.
it's the opposite of masked.
Yes, it's the opposite of mosque.
So tell us about the topic, Sheikh.
So we have to go back in history and actually understand an element about this, right? So when a lot of the people, they immigrated to America, Canada, UK, Australia, they immigrated in the early 70s, a big influx, 80s, a really big influx, 90s, a huge influx. We all came and we missed our masajids, and we should. That is a culture of Muslims that whichever land they go, they build houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
It's a natural thing.
It's a natural thing. We build houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that generation that came in the 80s and the 90s, they are the ones who actually put in the effort to build many of the masajids that you see today. And they'll tell you stories that when we were there in Toronto, there was only one masjid called Jami Masjid. And from Jami Masjid, everything permeated. Today, we have a similar example in Atlanta. There's one masjid. And this story repeats itself everywhere.
You are absolutely right.
It's every city you go to, there was this one main mother of all masajids. Everybody hung out there. And that was amazing because they got to meet their brothers left, right, and center. And as the communities grew, the Pakistanis grew in power, the Egyptians grew in power, the Arabs grew in power, the Lebanese and Urdunis, they grew in power. As their factions kept growing, they said, why don't we start our own masjids? They moved out of the city center into suburbs. And as they moved into suburbs, they started building masajids. And when they started the masjids, everybody was missing their back home. I want to be reminded of the biryani I used to have in my country. I want to be reminded of the mansaf I used to have in my back home. So every person, they took on their cultural baggage that they missed, and they made sure that it was interwoven into the fabric of that masjid. So today you have mosques, irrespective of which city you go to. Somali masjid,
Absolutely.
Pakistani masjid,
Absolutely.
this is Indian masjid, this is Masri masjid, this is Sufi masjid that reminds them of their back home, this is Salafi masjid, this reminds them of their back home. They're putting those labels, but in reality it's nostalgia. In reality they remind themselves of, this is how masjids were in my home or in my village, and I want it to be like that.
Yeah.
But what happened to American masjids?
But that creates a problem, isn't it?
It does.
It's kind of like how Christians have their churches. They have a Korean church. They have a
Baptist,
African
American church, Chinese churches, Polish churches, all of these churches.
I thought that was a Christian problem, but looks like it is more than that.
It is more, and it's available in our communities as much. Now, I want to give due credit to all those people who build these masajids. Alhamdulillah. They put their houses on lien. They put loans. I know an individual who was telling me, that when the first masjid, he was the one who wrote the first check for a particular masjid. At that time, he gave all his life savings to build the masjid. Right? So these things were challenges of the past. And today we are at a place where you have infrastructures. But you have an entire generation that the people who came in the 80s and 90s, where are their children? Nowhere to be found in the masjids.
That's the unmasked.
This is an entire generation that has been unmasked because they came in the 80s and 90s. They were maybe 10 years old. They were maybe born in here, either they were born here or they were very young when they came, and they grew up in a Western culture with Islam intact, but they grew up in a Western culture. Most of our masajids do not reflect any semblance of the true American Muslim culture. If you want to know what is America's Muslim culture, it's the black Muslim population and their culture. Today, if we go to any black Muslim masjid in Atlanta, by the way, Atlanta has the largest black Muslim population in America, right? Most of these cultural masjids, the Egyptian masjid, the Pakistani masjid, this masjid, that masjid, they have no connection with the biggest Muslim population. because they find even their culture not even Islamic. But if you really want to know what American Muslim culture is, ever go and spend Eid with an American Muslim, a black Muslim masjid. You're going to be shocked. It's a completely different culture. And it's Islamic, it's religious, it's based in religion. So what has happened is our cultural disconnect has completely alienated an entire generation. Where do these generation, where do they go? Where are they going to go? I mean, it's so much so that many of them don't even want to come to the masjid for nikah. And the current generation, because a lot of the masajids, they we have so many youth that are attending the masjids. What is the demographic of that youth? Immigrant parents' youth. They're not the youth. They're either first generation immigrants. The second or third generation, they're not here, which they exist because their parents came in the 80s. So what happened to those kids and their kids? They're gone. Most of the current kids that you have are recent immigrants that came in the last 15 years. And this is the case in most of the. I've traveled in major cities across America, even in Canada. That's the problem. The kids that are in the masajid are immigrant kids. They are not the next generation.
Meaning they were not born here. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, they were not born here. The ones that were born here are the ones that came when very young. They're nowhere to be found. I look at myself and all the kids that went to school with me. I can count on hands the number of my friends from high school that are part of masjids, that are at least praying in the masjid. They're less than 6. I had an entire group of at least 30, 35 Muslims, Pakistanis, Arabs, Egyptians, Indians, and they were good Muslims when they were in high school. But they don't even find masjids anymore attractive because the political climate that exists, the politics, this person is trying to cut this person, and we're just constantly playing this fight within us, yet an entire generation is no longer to be found in our masajids.
Sheikh, you mentioned that they don't want to even do nikah in the masjid.
They don't even want to do nikah. Like, I performed a nikah on a person, and they said, it's in a country club, and I'm like, okay, no problem. I go there, and this lady comes, and she's giving out these tickets, and I'm like, what are these tickets for? And she's like, this is for the alcohol bar. I'm like, what? There's alcohol being served in a nikah? He's like, yeah, this is because all of his friends are non-Muslim. Right? I mean, you look at my own family. I've been within our own family. Every single one of us can tell you within our own family, there are people that, they're hanging out with non-Muslims. They're hanging out with people that are nothing to do with deen. They're good individuals, but they have no semblance whatsoever. They don't want to even be part of a masjid, right? I had a person who called me from a very big Islamic center in North America. He called me 2 days ago, and he said that my name is so and so. I'm calling you from this Islamic center. I said, Jazakallah khair for calling. How can I help you? He said, I'm in my late 70s, I'm about to depart from this world. I moved here 50 years ago, and I helped build one of the largest Islamic institutions in America, and I'm on the founding board of this. I've been here in this city. I don't want to say the city because I'll give away the center. I've been here in this city as one of the early members. My grandchildren are no longer Muslim. This person, he sits on the board of a masjid. He is the head of Islamic education in one of the biggest Islamic centers, and his grandchildren are not Muslim. And he said to me, Sheikh, I want you, before I die, I want to build a project where we change this masjid and the attitude in our masjid to bring that generation, my grandkids' generation, back into the masjid. Can you come to our center at least once a month? We will pay for your tickets, we'll pay for everything to help fix this problem that we have in our masjid. So there's an entire generation that doesn't belong. And I asked this, somebody was like, mashallah, we have a very good youth. I said, okay, fine, let's do this. This is a litmus test for whether the masjid is relevant to our youth or not. A litmus test. Look at all your board members and all the exec committees that exist and all the trustees. Look at all the core people that are part of the masjid. And do a test of what percentage of those that are part of the masjid and running the masjid, what percentage of your kids show up to the masjid in Fajr and Isha. It's very, 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 very minuscule. Most board members, their kids don't show up. I'm not talking about any specific masjid, but I've been part of many masajids. I've been in Canada, in US. I mean, the board is super passionate. They're doing work. Where's the generation? Where's that generation?
It's like they actually, Jazakum khair, inshallah, they have the good intentions.
They have good intentions.
And they're doing what they can. But
the role is ours now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a problem with the clear symptom. But whose fault is it?
I would say there's two people to be blamed over here. Okay, first is the allowance of a certain type of a culture in a masjid. Whoever is allowing that, whoever is promoting a specific country's culture or back home's culture, it's definitely their fault, because our children are living in two worlds. They're living in the world that is out there, and they're living in the world which is your house, our houses, and our masajids. And there's a big disconnect in that. And the sooner we realize that we need to adopt, I'm not saying break Sharia rules. There's nowhere have I said that. Take the allowances that Sharia has given to bring about those changes within the masjids. And that's a necessary change. The second, so the people who are running the masajids, they are to blame. Because they are to blame for the permeation or existence of a specific type of culture. And you know what? You're seeing this renaissance happening. If you've not been to any of the recent YouTube on the Facebook and stuff, you see this every time and again. Group of people who were in the 40s, they got fed up. They got together and they said to the elders of the masjid, enough of you, we're going to take over. This happened in a major center in Canada, one of the largest centers in Canada.
What do you mean they said we'll take over?
Well, they came and they said we can't have you run the show anymore. I mean, there's an entire generation, our kids are no longer, and they eventually said, bi-ihtiram, all respect to you, you have to leave. And sometimes it becomes ugly, sometimes it becomes legal, sometimes it becomes fights. And in one of the most important things in terms of this question that you asked, who's to blame, is also to be able to realize that when you are irrelevant and with ihtiram you step down. This is the other thing in our back home countries. You will have somebody who's sitting, and even in these countries, right? You will have somebody who's in power and he's been in power for long, and he will hold on to that power until he has to be forced out.
Yeah.
Like in one of the masjids in Canada, there was a person who was there in power for 20 years. Eventually they had to bring lawyers and get rid of this guy. They had the khatib got up on the mimbar and he gave a khutbah. So this guy is a Husni Mubarak. Literally, I'm telling you, it's recorded. This guy, the khatib got up and we have a Husni Mubarak in our masjid.
I see that one. I gotta see it.
And then there was a change. But today that masjid is the only masjid. When I get invited to that masjid in Ramadan, I will give a khatira after Taraweeh. After الساعة 11 ونصف الليل 11:30 at night, you'll have 600-700 youth of that generation that is unmasked. They'll all be sitting there. Okay, so that change is going to be inevitable. It is going to be necessary. Many of the masajids are going to go through this pain area. The second people to blame is my generation. It's a very big blame on my generation. I tell this to all my friends, because if you're so concerned, there's an entire generation that is very practicing. They practice the deen. They are really concerned about their children and the deen of their children. But they don't come to the masjid. So they're not bad Muslims. They're really good Muslims. They're
just detached.
Detached from a masjid. And they get their spirituality from Al-Maghrib, Zaytuna, Al-Kawthar, Qalam, Bayyina, all of these institutes that were the consequence of an unmasked generation. Those institutions came into existence Because there's an entire generation that wants to learn the deen not in a culturally Egyptian or a Pakistani way.
Exactly.
They want to learn the deen in a way that befits their culture. So that entire generation has now built these institutions around. And every now and then you have something new coming up. You have Taysir Seminary, you have this coming, every now and then. Why? And who's attending those seminaries? Think about it. It's that unmosqued generation. So the people to blame is my generation, because with a little bit of difficulty that they faced to bring about some changes, positive changes, we gave up very quickly and we said, nah, man, these, and again, I'm not saying it in a derogatory manner, but a lot of people, oh man, I can't work with these uncles. Well, if Habibi, you're not going to work, you're soon going to have a masjid that is going to be unrecognizable. And because this generation has completely checked out of the masjid, who is replacing the leadership of this masjid? The new immigrants.